Today we're going to talk about a subject that a lot of us have an interest in, which is the behavior of lying. So we're going to talk about lying, or people that are not so honest, and typical behaviors that they engage in when they are not being honest. And what I want to do today is talk a little bit about this September 13th, 2017 interview.
From our nation's capital, please say hello to former White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer.
Jimmy Kimmel's interview with former Press Secretary Sean Spicer from the White House. So as you know, Sean Spicer's had quite a run in the White House, where he's been asked to go out on his first day and basically lie about the crowd size, saying that was the largest inauguration crowd ever. And Jimmy Kimmel asked him some really interesting questions.
So right off the bat, your first ever press conference, you get in there, and it's the day after the inauguration, right?
Yes.
And you are charged with the job of going in front of the press and saying that the inauguration crowd was the biggest crowd, I think, ever, biggest audience ever.
Yes, I'm aware of it.
And, yeah. And
I appreciate the reminder of how it went down.
so, did the president himself, now, if it was up to you, would this even have been a topic?
So each time Jimmy Kimmel asks him a straight yes or no question, and he looks down to the right and starts speaking in the second person. He no longer is smiling and saying, I this, I that. He likes to, when people are being less than honest, they detach themselves from the conversation by saying, you know, when you just do what the president wants, and he speaks it as though he's talking about someone else. You do this.
I think there was a lot of us that wanted to be focused on his agenda, what he spoke about in his inaugural address. So, look, but he's president. He made a decision.
So you have to go along, even though even if you know, and I'm going to ask you to say whether it was or not, but even if you know the crowd wasn't bigger, you have to go, as press secretary, you have to say that it was.
Look, your job as press secretary is to represent the president's voice.
And he says things like, yeah, we, the press corps, we the staffers do this, instead of saying I. Now, when he's being very honest, you notice that he'll say I, because there's a point in this interview where Jimmy Kimmel says, I'm on a horse, right? And he looks him in the eyes, and he knows he's not really on a horse, and he's honest and looks him in the eyes and says, no, you're not on a horse. So that was a clear, true answer.
That's
like if I were to say to you, I'm sitting on a horse right now,
then you
would
not.
say, yeah, right, exactly. That's the...
But you'll notice that when Sean Spicer looks down to the right and doesn't give a clear yes or no answer to a very close-ended question, he's being less than honest.
But the validity of the election, compared to looking at photos of the crowd at an inauguration, I mean, they're like, one's this and one is this. Did you try to talk him out of that line of defense?
I think there was a lot of us that wanted to be focused on his agenda, what he spoke about in his inaugural address. So, look, but he's president. He made a decision.
So you have to go along, even though even if you know, and I'm going to ask you to say whether it was or not, but even if you know the crowd wasn't bigger, you have to go, as press secretary, you have to say that it was.
Look, your job as press secretary is to represent the president's voice and to make sure that you are articulating what he believes is his mission. Or sometimes he would say, depending on the issue, look, I know what I believe, and this is what I think the right thing to do is.
And then you have to march out there and go, yeah, he had a bigger crowd, everybody.
Look, as I said, he's the president.
Each time he's being less than honest and not answering Jimmy's question, he says, well, when you're representing the president, you're just trying to communicate on his behalf. And he says, again, when you're the president, you do this. So he detaches himself and talks in the second and third person. He doesn't say I any longer. Another thing that Sean Spicer does is he says, my goal is to articulate the president's wishes. Now, he not once says that he agrees with her or when he's asked straight up questions.
And do you think that is a dangerous thing to delegitimize the press for America?
Look, I think it's a two-way street. And when these guys in the press corps go after the president in ways that are unbecoming. And again, it's sort of like what your mom said: two wrongs don't make a right. And so
Jimmy Kimmel says to Sean Spicer, "Do you think it's a dangerous thing to try to delegitimize the press corps in general?" And he knows that the answer is yes, it's a dangerous thing, but he doesn't answer with a yes or no thing. He says, well, it's a two-way street. He says it's a two-way street, suggesting that both Donald Trump and the press corps are not honest. And then later, you'll notice in the video, Jimmy Kimmel circles back to that and says, earlier you said it was a two-way street. So in other words, you're saying Donald Trump was lying. And he says, no, I didn't say that.
So when you say there were two wrongs, you mean Donald Trump, the president,
there were times,
was wrong?
but no, I didn't say that. But what?
So right within the same video, he lied, was caught lying, was called on it, and then retracted on it because he didn't want to, even though he's a former press secretary, he didn't want to be perceived as saying the president was wrong.
Are you open to meeting with him? Would you be willing to meet with him without condition, or would you demand that a strict set of parameters be placed around any encounter between you and the special counsel?
We'll see what happens. I mean, certainly I'll see what happens, but...
Okay, here are another two great examples of how lying behavior occurs and how misleading or being less than honest can manifest into not answering questions to mislead. So President Trump's asked a straight up yes or no question again, when previously he said he would sit down 100% and meet with special counsel.
Between you and the special counsel.
We'll see what happens. I mean, certainly I'll see what happens, but when they have no collusion and nobody's found any collusion at any level, it seems unlikely that you'd even have an interview.
This time, as it gets closer to the concerns about collusions with Russia, his answer was not a yes or no. It was not 100%. It was, we'll see. You know, we'll see what happens. So by saying we'll see what happens, this way he can not meet with Mueller and say that the reason he didn't meet is because he doesn't believe there is any collusion. So that's one strategy that he's using.
Between you and the special counsel.
We'll see what happens. I mean, certainly I'll see what happens, but when they have no collusion and nobody's found any collusion at any level, it seems unlikely that you'd even have an interview.
That's not what he said in the Rose Garden 7 months ago. Proof.
Would you be willing to speak under oath to give your version of those events?
100%.
100%. Will the president sit down with the special counsel?
Just a straight up question, yes or no, asked by Chris Cuomo, and her answer is not a yes or no. She skirts around the issue, and she says that, you know, the White House made it clear we're cooperating with any request for information. So by answering in that way, the definition of cooperation in her eyes and the president's eyes, if the president in the future decides not to meet with special counsel, he'll claim that he cooperated with special counsel in other ways, memos or having Kellyanne Conway speak with special counsel. This way, he has an out where he cannot meet with Mueller.
The president and his lawyers have made very clear from the beginning that this White House is cooperating with requests for information, and that hasn't changed.
But will he sit down with this special prosecutor? He had said, sure, 100%. Now he said, we'll see, we'll see. I don't know why we'd have to have an interview. Very different, no?
Well, Chris, the president has also said as recently as today that there is no Russian collusion.
Other times throughout this interview, Chris Cuomo asked the simple yes or no question about President Trump meeting with special counsel Mueller, and what Kellyanne Conway does, which is another evasive tactic when you're being less than honest. It's a pretty good one where she redirects the whole conversation and speaks about all kinds of other positive outcomes that President Trump is producing with economics, with drugs, and things like that throughout our country. That way she can get away from answering that very direct question about whether or not President Trump will meet with special counsel Mueller.
Can you admit you said some things that were not true?
I think when you get up at that podium, your goal is to tell the media and the American people the best information you have at the time.
The lies just keep getting worse and worse. This interview here on January 8th, 2018 on CNN, Sean Spicer is flat out just asked the question, did you mislead the public? and he doesn't answer yes or no. He just says, "Yeah, I think the goal is blah blah blah
I think
blah."
when you get up at that podium, your goal is to tell the media and the American people the best information you have at the time. There's no question that sometimes that information changed as facts became available to us. But at no time did I go up and say something that was, as you put it, demonstrably false intentionally. There were times when facts became available to us later throughout a scenario or an event, and we went up. And to the best of my ability, when I did screw up or I didn't have all the facts, I'd say, hey, we've got further details that have come out.
And then he says that the facts changed later, and then that was his excuse for claiming that it was the largest inauguration crowd ever.
So you're telling me that when you said that this was the largest inauguration crowd, you believed that?
But what
all
did I
those
say?
days
But
later.
SC, look, I don't want to relitigate anything, but if you actually look at
we
what I
have
said,
to. It's important.
I know.
It's important because you want the public's trust
I understand
back.
that. I understand that. But
She approaches that question again of Sean Spicer, and she said, when you said this is the largest inauguration crowd, did you really believe that? And of course, he does not answer yes or no. He looks down. So he flat out lies and said, I didn't say that. He put a spin on it, saying that when you include Twitter and all the social media feeds, this really was the largest inauguration crowd. Truly misleading. We don't even know if that's true. The worst part about it is when people are less than honest, they go back and try to cover their tracks. So I just thought that was another good one.